The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Prague as Detective Marcus Chen reviewed the case file that had consumed his life for the past 18 months. The photograph clipped to the front showed a man in his 30s with piercing blue eyes and a scar running from his left temple to his jawline. Thomas Novak, age 34, wanted for armed robbery, assault, and the murder of 2 police officers during a botched bank heist in Vienna. Marcus had been part of the international task force hunting Novak since the beginning. The fugitive was smart, methodical, and always seemed to be one step ahead of law enforcement. He had aliases in 7 countries, spoke 4 languages fluently, and had managed to evade capture across 3 continents. What made him particularly dangerous was his military background as a former Special Forces operative who had gone rogue after a dishonorable discharge. The case had started simply enough. Novak had walked into the Erste Bank in Vienna's financial district on a Tuesday morning, wearing a business suit and carrying what appeared to be a briefcase. Security cameras showed him calmly approaching the counter, speaking briefly with a teller, and then everything went wrong. Within minutes, 2 security guards lay dead, the vault had been compromised, and Novak had disappeared with over 2 million euros in cash and bearer bonds. What puzzled investigators was the precision of the operation. Novak had disabled the bank's security system from the inside, knew exactly which vault contained the most valuable assets, and had an escape route planned that avoided every police checkpoint in the city. It was as if he had inside information, but background checks on all bank employees came up clean. Marcus closed the file and walked to the window of his temporary office in Prague's police headquarters. The Czech authorities had agreed to let him coordinate the search from their facilities after intelligence suggested Novak was hiding somewhere in Eastern Europe. 3 separate sightings in the past month had placed him in Prague, Warsaw, and Budapest, but each time the trail went cold within hours. His phone buzzed with a message from Inspector Sarah Rodriguez, his partner back in Vienna. New intelligence suggested Novak had been spotted at a hostel in Prague's Old Town district. Marcus grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Knowing this could be another dead end, but unable to ignore any potential lead. The hostel was a converted medieval building tucked between a bookshop and a small cafe. The manager, a nervous young man named Pavel, immediately recognized Novak's photograph, but claimed the man had checked out 2 days earlier under the name James Mitchell. He had paid in cash, kept to himself, and spoke perfect Czech with what Pavel described as a slight accent he couldn't place. Marcus examined the registration book and noticed something odd. The handwriting was too neat, too practiced, as if the signature had been rehearsed many times. More importantly, the address given was for a street that didn't exist in London. Small details like this were what separated professional fugitives from amateurs. As he questioned other guests who might have seen Novak, Marcus received another call. This time, it was from a contact at Interpol with urgent news. Financial records showed that someone had accessed one of Novak's known accounts from an internet cafe just 6 blocks away, less than an hour ago. Racing through the narrow streets, Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with a hot pursuit. The internet cafe was crowded with tourists and local students, but the owner remembered a man matching Novak's description who had used computer terminal 7. The browsing history showed searches for train schedules to Berlin and Vienna, currency exchange rates, and, surprisingly, several news articles about the ongoing investigation into his crimes. Marcus studied the cafe's security footage and felt his pulse quicken. There, clear as day, was Thomas Novak sitting at Terminal 7 just 43 minutes earlier. The footage showed him checking his watch frequently and glancing toward the door every few minutes, behavior consistent with someone expecting trouble or planning a quick exit. But something else caught Marcus's attention. In the background of the footage, partially obscured by other customers, was a figure that seemed to be watching Novak. The person's face wasn't clearly visible, but their posture suggested they were conducting surveillance. Marcus rewound the footage several times, trying to get a better look at this mysterious observer. His radio crackled to life with reports of a disturbance at Prague Castle, the sprawling complex that housed the Czech president's offices and served as the symbol of Czech statehood. Initial reports were confusing, but witnesses described a man matching Novak's description who had somehow gotten past the first security checkpoint and was now somewhere within the castle grounds. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Prague Castle wasn't just a tourist attraction, it was one of the most heavily guarded locations in the country. If Novak had managed to breach its security, he either had help from the inside or was more desperate than anyone had realized. Desperate fugitives made dangerous decisions, and in a location filled with government officials and international visitors, the potential for disaster was enormous. The drive to Prague Castle took 12 minutes through heavy afternoon traffic. As Marcus approached the ancient gates, he could see that the entire area had been cordoned off. Police vehicles surrounded the complex, and he could make out the distinctive black uniforms of the elite castle guard, the specialized unit responsible for protecting the Czech Republic's most important government facilities. Commander Viktor Dvorak of the Castle Guard met Marcus at the outer perimeter. A veteran of 25 years in law enforcement, Dvorak had the weathered face and steady demeanor of someone who had dealt with every conceivable security threat. He briefed Marcus quickly while they walked toward the castle's main courtyard. According to Dvorak, Novak had approached the tourist entrance at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon, presenting what appeared to be valid identification and a pre-booked tour reservation. The guards at the checkpoint had no reason to be suspicious. Thousands of tourists visited the castle daily, and Novak's documentation seemed legitimate. The problem arose when a guard conducting a routine secondary screening noticed that Novak's passport showed signs of tampering. When they tried to detain him for additional questioning, Novak had overpowered 2 guards and disappeared into the maze of courtyards, halls, and towers that made up the castle complex. Marcus studied the layout map Dvorak provided. Prague Castle was enormous, covering almost 70,000 square meters and containing multiple palaces, churches, gardens, and defensive structures. Some parts dated back over 1,000 years, with countless hidden passages, storage rooms, and architectural details that could provide hiding places for someone who knew what they were looking for. What troubled Marcus most was the question of why Novak would trap himself in such a location. The castle had limited exit points, all of which were now under heavy guard. Security cameras covered most of the public areas, and teams of officers were conducting systematic sweeps of every building. For someone as careful and strategic as Novak had proven to be, this seemed like an uncharacteristically poor decision. Unless, Marcus thought, this wasn't about escape at all. Maybe Novak had come to Prague Castle for a specific purpose, something worth the enormous risk of being cornered by law enforcement. The question was, what could be valuable enough to justify such a gamble? As if reading his thoughts, Dvorak mentioned that today's visitor list included several high-profile individuals. The German ambassador was touring the historical collections. A delegation from the European Union was meeting with Czech officials about upcoming trade negotiations, and there was a private reception scheduled for major donors to the castle's restoration fund. Marcus felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to align in his mind. Novak's military background would have given him skills in reconnaissance and tactical planning. His access to detailed inside information about the Vienna Bank suggested he had sources in places most criminals couldn't reach. And now he had deliberately entered one of Europe's most secure government facilities on a day when it housed multiple high-value targets. The radio chatter intensified as search teams reported their progress through different sections of the castle. The old royal palace had been cleared, along with the treasury and most of the administrative buildings. St. Vitus Cathedral, the massive Gothic structure at the heart of the complex, was being searched methodically, but its countless alcoves, chapels, and architectural features made the process slow and dangerous. Marcus requested permission to join one of the search teams and was assigned to a unit led by Sergeant Anna Kraus, a specialist in high-risk operations. As they moved through the castle's ancient corridors, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. Novak was too smart to be hiding like a common criminal. He was planning something, and time was running out to figure out what. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade as they reached the castle's eastern wing, an area that housed administrative offices and private meeting rooms. It was here that Sergeant Kraus suddenly held up her hand, signaling for silence. In the distance, they could hear voices coming from one of the secured conference rooms, voices that shouldn't have been there since the entire area had supposedly been evacuated. Moving carefully along the marble-floored hallway, the team approached the source of the voices. Through a partially open door, Marcus could see into what appeared to be a high-security briefing room. The voices became clearer, and what he heard made his blood run cold. Through the gap in the doorway, Marcus could see Thomas Novak standing in the center of the briefing room, but he wasn't alone. Seated around a polished conference table were 4 men in expensive suits, and their conversation was conducted in hushed, urgent tones. What shocked Marcus most was the body language. These weren't hostages cowering in fear. They appeared to be having a business meeting. Sergeant Kraus positioned her team for a coordinated entry while Marcus strained to hear the conversation. Fragments of words reached him. Transfer complete, accounts verified, and most disturbing of all, Phase 2 operational. This wasn't a desperate fugitive hiding from law enforcement. This was something else entirely. Marcus's radio crackled softly as Commander Dvorak reported that thermal imaging had detected 5 heat signatures in the briefing room, confirming what Marcus was observing. The question was whether to move immediately or continue gathering intelligence. The decision was made for them when one of the men at the table stood up and walked directly toward the door. The door swung open to reveal a distinguished gentleman in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Marcus recognized him immediately from intelligence briefings as Dr. Heinrich Weber, a prominent banker from Zurich who sat on the boards of several international financial institutions. Dr. Weber looked directly at Marcus with no sign of surprise or fear. "Detective Chen," Weber said calmly, "I believe you've been looking for Mr. Novak. Perhaps it's time we had a proper conversation." The tactical situation had just become infinitely more complicated. Weber's calm demeanor suggested he had been expecting this confrontation, which meant the entire scenario had been orchestrated. Marcus signaled for his team to maintain their positions while he tried to process this unexpected development. Novak appeared in the doorway beside Weber, his hands visible and empty. "Detective," he said in accented English, "I think you'll find this situation is not what it appears to be. May I suggest we discuss this civilly before anyone makes assumptions that could prove unfortunate for all involved?" Marcus had trained for hostage situations, terrorist incidents, and armed confrontations, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for a wanted fugitive politely requesting a conversation. Every instinct told him this was a trap, yet Novak's body language suggested cooperation rather than confrontation. "Mr. Novak," Marcus replied carefully, "you're wanted for multiple felonies, including the murder of 2 police officers. Whatever conversation you think we need to have can happen at police headquarters after you surrender your weapons and submit to arrest." Novak nodded thoughtfully, as if considering the proposal. "Detective, those charges are based on evidence that I suspect you'll find quite different from what you've been told. Dr. Weber has documents that might change your perspective on the Vienna incident and everything that followed." Weber stepped forward, holding a leather briefcase. "Detective Chen, what I'm about to show you is classified at the highest levels of European intelligence. Thomas Novak is not the criminal your task force believes him to be. He's been working undercover for the past 2 years on an operation that has just reached its critical phase. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his understanding of the case. If Weber was telling the truth, then everything about the investigation had been based on false assumptions. But Weber was a Swiss banker, not an intelligence officer, and Novak was definitely responsible for the deaths in Vienna. The evidence was overwhelming. "Prove it," Marcus said simply. Weber opened his briefcase and withdrew a folder marked with Swiss government seals. The Vienna bank robbery was a cover operation designed to infiltrate a money laundering network that has been channeling funds to terrorist organizations across Europe. The 2 men who died were not police officers. They were mercenaries hired by the very criminals we've been trying to expose. As Weber spoke, Marcus noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Sergeant Krauss and her team were repositioning themselves for a better tactical advantage, but they were also listening intently to Weber's explanation. The situation was unprecedented. A wanted fugitive claiming to be an undercover agent, supported by a prominent banker with apparent government credentials. Novak continued the explanation. "The money I took from Vienna wasn't stolen, it was already stolen. We traced it back through a network of shell companies to its source, a consortium of European businessmen who have been financing extremist groups while maintaining their public reputations as respectable citizens." Marcus examined the documents Weber provided. They appeared authentic, complete with official letterheads, signatures, and classification stamps. If genuine, they indicated that the Vienna incident had been a joint operation between Swiss intelligence and Europol, designed to trace money flows that conventional investigation methods hadn't been able to penetrate. But something still didn't add up. "If this is a legitimate operation," Marcus asked, "why wasn't my task force informed? Why have we been hunting you for 18 months based on false information?" Weber and Novak exchanged glances before Weber responded. "Because, Detective, we had reason to believe that the money laundering network had penetrated law enforcement agencies. Information shared with official channels was consistently leaked to the targets of our investigation. We couldn't risk exposing the operation until we had identified and neutralized the security breach." The implications of Weber's statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. If true, it meant that someone within the international law enforcement community had been actively sabotaging the investigation. Every move Marcus's task force had made, every lead they had pursued, could have been fed to the criminals they were trying to catch. Marcus's radio suddenly erupted with urgent chatter. Commander Dvorak was reporting that additional suspects had been identified entering the castle grounds through a maintenance entrance. Security cameras showed at least 6 armed individuals moving through the lower levels of the complex, and their tactical equipment suggested they were professionals rather than common criminals. Novak's expression immediately became grim. "They found us sooner than expected," he said to Weber. "We need to move to the secondary location immediately." Weber began gathering documents from the table while addressing Marcus. "Detective, those men approaching are not here to arrest anyone. They're here to eliminate everyone in this room to prevent the information we've gathered from reaching the authorities. Your presence here has actually accelerated their timeline." Marcus found himself facing an impossible decision. Everything he had been told about the case was potentially false, but the immediate threat appeared genuine. Through the windows, he could see muzzle flashes in the castle's courtyard below, indicating that whoever had entered the building was now engaged in armed conflict with the castle guard. Sergeant Krauss approached Marcus with an update from her radio. "Sir, we've lost contact with 3 patrol units, and Commander Dvorak is reporting casualties among the castle guard. Whatever's happening here, it's bigger than a simple arrest operation." Novak moved to the window and peered through the curtains. "They're using military tactics," he observed. "Coordinated advance, suppressing fire, electronic countermeasures. This isn't a criminal organization. It's a paramilitary unit." Weber finished packing the documents and turned to Marcus. "Detective, I understand your position is difficult, but we need your help. The information in these files identifies the source of financing for terrorist attacks across Europe, including several that haven't happened yet. If these documents are destroyed, hundreds of innocent people will die. Marcus looked at the faces around him. Novak, the fugitive who claimed to be an undercover agent. Weber, the banker who claimed to have government authorization for a covert operation, and his own team, trained law enforcement officers who were clearly out of their depth in what appeared to be an intelligence operation gone wrong. The sound of gunfire was getting closer, echoing through the ancient stone corridors of the castle. Marcus realized that regardless of who was telling the truth about the larger situation, the immediate threat was real and deadly. His priority had to be protecting the lives of everyone in the room while trying to sort out the complex web of claims and counterclaims. Sergeant Krause, Marcus ordered, establish a defensive perimeter around this room and get us a direct line to Commander Dvorak. We need to know exactly what we're facing. As Krause moved to comply, Marcus turned to Novak. If you're really one of the good guys, then you'll understand why I can't take your word for any of this. But if you want my help dealing with the immediate threat, you'll submit to temporary detention until we can verify your story. Novak nodded without hesitation. I understand completely, Detective. But I need you to understand something as well. The men approaching this room have orders to kill everyone here, including you and your officers. They can't allow any witnesses to survive, regardless of who believes what about my identity or my mission. Weber added urgently, Detective, there's something else you need to know. The leader of the group that's attacking us is someone you'll recognize. He's the real mastermind behind the Vienna operation. And he's been using your task force to hunt down the very people who were trying to expose him. Before Marcus could respond, the lights in the building suddenly went out, plunging the entire wing into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in seconds later, casting eerie red shadows throughout the corridors. Over the radio, Commander Dvorak's voice was tight with stress as he reported that the attackers had cut the main power supply and were systematically moving through the castle. In the dim emergency lighting, Marcus could see that Novak had produced a weapon from somewhere, but instead of pointing it at Marcus or the other officers, he moved to the window to assess the tactical situation outside. Weber had opened another case, revealing what appeared to be military-grade communication equipment. Detective, Novak said quietly. In about 2 minutes, armed professionals are going to breach this room with the intention of killing everyone inside. You can arrest me afterward if we survive, but right now, I'm the best chance you have of keeping your people alive. Marcus looked at Sergeant Krause, whose expression indicated she had reached the same conclusion. Whatever the truth about Novak's identity or mission, the immediate threat required them to work together. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside made the decision for them. Weber finished setting up his communication equipment and handed Marcus an earpiece. Detective, you're about to hear something that will change everything you think you know about this case. But first, we need to survive the next few minutes. The footsteps in the corridor had stopped, replaced by an ominous silence that every law enforcement officer recognized as the calm before an assault. Marcus positioned his team for a defensive action while trying to process the information overload of the past few minutes. Then Weber's radio crackled to life, and Marcus heard a voice that made his blood freeze. The voice coming through Weber's radio was speaking English with a slight accent, giving tactical instructions to the assault team. But what made Marcus's blood freeze was the recognition. He had heard this voice countless times over the past 18 months. It belonged to Inspector Sarah Rodriguez, his partner and closest colleague on the task force. "Target room secured," Rodriguez's voice continued. "Novak, Weber, and the detective are inside. Remember, no survivors. This ends tonight." Marcus stared at the radio in disbelief while Novak and Weber watched his expression with grim understanding. The woman he had worked alongside for years whom he had trusted with his life on multiple occasions, was leading the assault team that planned to kill them all. Weber spoke quietly into another device. "Detective Chen, I'm sorry you had to learn about Inspector Rodriguez this way, but she's been feeding information to the money laundering network since the beginning of your investigation. Every dead end your task force encountered, every time Novak seemed to disappear just as you were closing in, it was because Rodriguez warned them in advance." Marcus felt 18 months of careful detective work collapsing around him. Every briefing he had shared with Rodriguez, every strategy session, every piece of evidence they had discussed together had been passed directly to the criminals they were hunting. She hadn't just betrayed him, she had betrayed every law enforcement officer working the case. Sergeant Krause moved to the door and reported that she could hear multiple sets of footsteps positioning themselves in the corridor. Based on the sounds, she estimated at least 6 attackers, all apparently well-trained and coordinated. The tactical situation was desperate. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a room with limited exit options. Novak checked his weapon and moved to a position that would give him a clear field of fire when the door was breached. "Detective," he said calmly, "I know this is difficult, but you need to understand that Rodriguez has been working for the network for over 3 years. The Vienna operation was our attempt to gather evidence against her and her contacts, but she figured out what we were doing and activated her security protocols." Weber had been monitoring multiple radio frequencies and reported that Rodriguez's team had also taken control of the castle's main communications center. Commander Dvorak and the surviving Castle Guard units were effectively cut off from outside support, and Rodriguez had jammed most emergency frequencies to prevent anyone from calling for backup. The lights in the corridor outside began flickering in a pattern that Novak immediately recognized as a tactical signal. "Breach in 30 seconds, he announced. "Detective, your sergeant and her team need to take cover behind the conference table. This is going to get very intense very quickly." Marcus found himself in the surreal position of taking tactical advice from a man he had spent 18 months trying to capture. But the evidence of Rodriguez's betrayal was undeniable, and the immediate threat to his officers was real. He ordered Sergeant Krause and her team to establish a defensive position while trying to process the complete reversal of everything he thought he knew. Weber handed Marcus a sealed envelope. "Detective, if something happens to me, this contains the complete financial records of the money laundering operation, including bank account numbers, transaction records, and the real identities of everyone involved. There are also details about planned terrorist attacks that Rodriguez and her network are financing." The sound of shaped charges being placed on the door made further conversation impossible. Novak motioned for everyone to take cover as the distinctive whine of electronic detonators indicated the breach was imminent. The explosion that followed was precisely controlled, designed to create an entry point without causing structural damage that might injure the attackers. As smoke filled the room, Marcus could see tactical lights cutting through the darkness, accompanied by the sound of boots on marble floor. What happened next unfolded with the deadly precision of a military operation. Rodriguez entered first, wearing full tactical gear and carrying an assault rifle. Behind her came 5 other figures, all armed and moving with the coordinated efficiency of special operations soldiers. But Novak had anticipated their approach. Instead of defending from behind the conference table, he had positioned himself to the side of the entry point, giving him a tactical advantage as the assault team entered. His first shots took down 2 attackers before they could orient themselves in the smoky room. Marcus, despite his confusion about loyalties and identities, fell back on his training. Rodriguez was leading an armed assault against law enforcement officers, which made her an immediate threat regardless of any other considerations. He drew his weapon and called for her to surrender, knowing she wouldn't comply but following procedure nonetheless. Rodriguez's response was to turn her rifle toward Marcus, confirming everything Weber and Novak had told him about her true allegiances. The woman who had been his partner, who had shared countless meals and conversations about their cases, who had met his family at department gatherings, was trying to kill him without hesitation. Sergeant Krause and her team engaged the remaining attackers while Novak maneuvered to flank Rodriguez's position. The ancient briefing room had become a battlefield, with gunfire echoing off stone walls that had witnessed centuries of political intrigue, but nothing quite like this modern betrayal. Weber, despite his age and civilian status, proved remarkably calm under fire. He had taken cover behind a heavy bookshelf and was still monitoring his communication equipment, apparently coordinating with someone outside the castle. His radio crackled with status updates in multiple languages, suggesting this operation had international oversight. The firefight lasted less than 3 minutes, but the aftermath revealed the true scope of the conspiracy Marcus had unknowingly been fighting. Rodriguez lay wounded but alive, her tactical vest having stopped what would otherwise have been a fatal shot from Novak's weapon. As Sergeant Krause secured the other attackers, Marcus knelt beside his former partner. "Why, Sarah?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Rodriguez looked up at him with no trace of remorse. "You have no idea how much money moves through these networks, Marcus. The salary we make chasing small-time criminals is nothing compared to what the real players offer for information. I've been financially secure for years while you've been living paycheck to paycheck on a detective's salary." Weber approached with additional documents that had been in Rodriguez's tactical pack. "Detective Chen, these are targeting folders for 12 law enforcement officers across Europe who were getting too close to the truth. Your name is at the top of the list, which means tonight's operation was as much about eliminating you as it was about stopping Novak and myself." Marcus examined the targeting folders with growing horror. Each file contained detailed personal information: home addresses, family members' schedules, daily routines, and tactical assessments of how to eliminate the targets while making their deaths appear accidental or unrelated to their professional activities. Novak had been monitoring the radio traffic from the attackers' communication equipment. "Detective, we have approximately 15 minutes before Rodriguez's backup team realizes the operation has failed and activates their contingency plans. Those contingency plans include eliminating loose ends, which means your family is in immediate danger." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. His wife and 2 children were at home in Vienna, completely unaware that their lives were at risk because of his professional activities. Rodriguez's network wouldn't hesitate to target civilians if it meant protecting their operations. Weber was already coordinating a response through his communication equipment. "I'm contacting Europol and the Swiss Federal Police to provide protection for your family, Detective. They'll also begin coordinating arrests based on the information we've gathered." As emergency medical teams finally reached their location, Marcus looked around the briefing room that had become the center of an international conspiracy. Novak was providing first aid to one of Sergeant Krause's officers who had been wounded in the firefight. Weber was organizing evidence while speaking rapidly into multiple phones. Rodriguez was being prepared for medical evacuation under heavy guard. Commander Dvorak arrived with a full report on the situation throughout the castle. Rodriguez's assault team had killed 4 castle guard officers and wounded 7 others before being neutralized. The maintenance tunnels they had used to enter the complex revealed a level of planning that indicated the attack had been organized weeks in advance. But perhaps the most shocking discovery came when Weber's communication equipment established contact with a joint task force that had been working parallel to Marcus's investigation. For 2 years, intelligence agencies across Europe had been tracking the money laundering network, but they had been unable to make progress because their operations were consistently compromised. Novak, it turned out, wasn't just a Swiss intelligence operative. He was part of a multinational team that had been created specifically to investigate suspected leaks within traditional law enforcement channels. The Vienna bank robbery had been an elaborate sting operation designed to provide Novak with criminal credentials that would allow him to infiltrate the money laundering network. The documents Rodriguez had been carrying revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Over 2 billion euros in terrorist financing, planned attacks on infrastructure targets across 8 countries, and a network of corrupted officials that reached into the highest levels of European government. Marcus sat in the aftermath, trying to reconcile everything he had learned. The fugitive he had been hunting was actually an undercover operative trying to save lives. His trusted partner had been a criminal working for terrorist financiers. The case that had defined his career for 18 months had been built on deliberately false information. Weber provided the final piece of the puzzle as medical teams worked on the wounded and evidence specialists cataloged the documents. "Detective Chen, your task force wasn't a failure. It was actually the perfect cover for our operation. Every time you got close to Novak, it reinforced his criminal credentials with the network we were trying to infiltrate. Your investigation gave him the reputation he needed to gain their trust." Novak, his arm in a sling from a wound sustained during the firefight, confirmed Weber's explanation. "Detective, you were never supposed to catch me, but your pursuit had to be authentic for the operation to work. Rodriguez's information allowed the network to stay ahead of your task force, which made them confident that Novak was genuinely running from law enforcement rather than working with them." As the sun set over Prague Castle, Marcus reflected on the events that had transformed his understanding of justice, loyalty, and truth. The fugitive was a hero, his partner was a traitor, and the case he thought he understood had been a carefully orchestrated deception designed to protect innocent lives. The final twist came 3 weeks later, when the international arrests coordinated by Weber's intelligence network resulted in the dismantling of one of the largest terrorist financing operations in European history. Rodriguez, facing life imprisonment, provided additional information that led to the prevention of attacks that would have killed hundreds of civilians. Novak returned to his real identity as Captain Thomas Mueller of Swiss military intelligence, decorated for his role in the operation. Weber resumed his position as a banking executive, though few would ever know about his parallel career in financial intelligence. Marcus returned to Vienna with a new understanding of how complex the fight against international crime had become. The case that had nearly ended his career had ultimately saved countless lives, though he would never again take for granted the loyalty of those closest to him. The story that had begun with a simple bank robbery had revealed a conspiracy that reached across national boundaries and into the heart of European security. Sometimes, Marcus realized, the most important victories came disguised as defeats, and the most dangerous enemies were those who appeared to be trusted friends. In the end, justice had been served, but not in any way that Marcus could have anticipated when he first opened Thomas Novak's case file on that morning in Prague. The fugitive on the run who had held a royal guard at gunpoint had ultimately been the very person working to protect them all.